My mother-in-law, Marion Starr, lived up to her name. She was an incredible woman. Marion discovered the Kootenays way back in the 1970s. She found a farm outside Nelson on a lush bench above Queens Bay. She got right to work. Marion turned this raw land into a juice farm with wildflowers peppered about, fruit trees everywhere, a large garden, animals constantly underfoot. She was out there every day, hands in the ground, working, planting, weeding, turning this magical place into her own little Kootenai Shangri-La. And it's just like that to this day. Marion did all of this while practicing traditional Chinese medicine she learned at a school in Nelson. Yeah, she was a true Kootenai original. But there's one story about this lovely, earthy woman I could never quite get my head around. It's the story of her and the wild turkeys. Marion hated them. She loathed these noisy, large, awkward birds. I don't know if you know their story, but wild turkeys are not native to the Kootenays. They arrived here around the time Marion did, in the 70s. They came from the States, and they made themselves right at home. Her arch rivals. You see, wild turkeys are the enemy of the horticulturalist. A group of wild turkeys, they're called a rafter, will shred a flower patch before you can say Thanksgiving. And they'll gobble up anything in your garden. Like anything. A fence won't keep them out because they've got just enough flying power to get their chubby bodies right over it. Turkeys are kind of loud, a little bit arrogant, and they were the enemy of Marion Starr. She'd whisper to me, "Mitch, if you see a bunch of turkeys crossing the road, it's okay to take them out. They don't belong. They're interlopers. You'd be doing us a favor." What was this little woman suggesting? A murder most foul? A turkey slaughter? It makes you wonder, what do you do with these invasive species? Plants are animals that aren't supposed to be here. They just moved right in, often to the detriment of native species that do belong. Do we have the right to play judge and jury? To play God and try and keep these invasives out? We need to talk about that. We need to talk turkey. Hi, I'm Mitchell Scott, Editor-in-Chief at Kootenai Mountain Culture Magazine, and this is The Headwaters, brought to you by Columbia Basin Trust. The Headwaters is a podcast that explores the issues and ideas of people living in the Columbia River Basin, or the Kootenays. The two names are interchangeable. It also happens to be a magnificent place that I proudly call my home. We'll begin Season 1 with the idea of saving species. Is it even possible to manage the delicate balance that is Mother Nature? It's an idea worth exploring. Our first story is about an American invasion. We knew they were coming. That was inevitable as the wild turkeys were. But is there anything we can do to keep the Americans out? We sent Lindsay Clegg to investigate.
Thanks, Mitch. They're loud, they're obnoxious, and I don't know how else to say this. They're slimy.
A little harsh there, don't you think, Lindsay?
No, not at all. I'm talking about the American bullfrog. That's its distinct call. It's so loud that you can hear it from as far away as 2 kilometers. It's an invasive species that's hopping across the border into the Kootenays and devouring local frogs, as well as bugs, birds, and other amphibians.
Can you tell us what is actually an invasive species?
Well, Mitch, an invasive species are plants, animals not native to any given region. They just move in, and it's often with devastating results. There's cane toads and rabbits in Australia that are the famous examples, but we also have our own. Knotweed, you see the signs everywhere. It's one of the worst plant species. There's this tremendous effort now to keep out zebra mussels out of our waterways. And then we have this American bullfrog. And there are others too.
Where's this bullfrog coming in?
In the Kootenays here, it's crossing the border in the Creston Valley and south of Salmo. I think it began about half a decade or so ago. And Mitch, it's kind of worrisome. The American bullfrog is the largest frog on the continent, and it has this voracious appetite. They'll eat almost anything they can get into their mouth, like the northern leopard frog. And this is an indigenous frog to the Columbia Basin, and it's a species at risk of disappearing completely from here. The only place left in BC where we have leopard frogs is in the Creston Valley, and the American bullfrog could wipe them out.
What's being done about this invasion?
That's the topic of our first story. I went out bullfrog hunting, if you can believe it, just south of Salmo, right next to the Nelway border crossing.
My name is Matt Morrison. I coordinate the American Bullfrog Control Program for the Kootenay Boundary region.
Our guide is Matt Morrison, and in the summer he coordinates 2 crews of frog hunters who patrol the border looking for the American bullfrog. They mostly work in Creston, but also at Lomond Lake south of Salmo, and that's where I spent an evening with Matt and his crew scouring the shoreline for the American bullfrog.
The bullfrog, as an invasive species, threatens native amphibians. As it moves into areas that it's not native to, it can outcompete. Bullfrogs are kind of voracious predators. They can basically eat anything that fits into its mouth. So they can eat other amphibians, which is unique to amphibians in this region. All of our native species just eat kind of like insects. Additionally, they produce a wild amount of tadpoles, so they outcompete. And as well, they're a known vector of a fungus, a fungal disease known as chytrid fungus, which is a leading cause of amphibian decline globally.
What kind of damage are they doing to the area here?
We're in what's called an early detection rapid response phase. So hopefully they haven't done any damage yet. We're trying to prevent them from doing the damage. A lot of our work is centered around the recovery of the northern leopard frog, which is a critically endangered species in Creston. We're down to 1 breeding population in BC, which used to have a wide range through the Columbia and Kootenay River system. So with this extremely vulnerable population, as bullfrogs kind of migrate north and approach the northern leopard frog habitat, there's concern that the myriad of issues that the bullfrogs pose will be kind of like the last straw for that population and could lead to their demise. So basically, we're really trying to prevent them from establishing in known leopard frog habitat.
All right.
Up on in there.
Okay. So, Mitch, I hop in a canoe with my producer, and Matt jumps in a rowboat. Matt's crew of 2 technicians are experimenting with netting and frog traps. They set the traps at the far end of Lomond Lake while we paddle around looking for individual frogs. The sun is setting, and it's dead calm on this lovely little lake, and you can paddle across it in about 5 minutes.
And how did you do?
Well, first, my producer assures me he's a very experienced paddler, and he promptly dumps his camera kit into the bottom of the boat and his notepad in the lake. So it's not the best start. However, it turns out I have an eye for frogs. I spot one right away, squatting in lily pads at the edge of the Lomond Lake, and we paddle over. I'm trying to think of some way to get to it, but of course I don't actually have a plan, other than to maybe scoop him with my canoe paddle. There's one right here. Damn, so close.
Gone.
Saw me and took off. Okay, so I'm not such a great frog hunter, but we steady ourselves in the canoe and we paddle along the reedy shore of Lomond Lake. We all have headlamps on and it's starting to get dark. And this is when the frog hunting is supposed to get really good. In the dark, you can see their eyes shining from the headlamps. We look around, nothing. We hear nothing, we see nothing. The Americans are all quiet tonight. The crew thinks it might be because it's a little bit cool out, so they aren't croaking to each other. We paddle up and down this beautiful little lake. It's really actually a pretty nice way to spend the evening, but there's no action. And I'm wanting frog action. I'm kind of getting into this frog hunt.
So while you're paddling around, I'd like to know the difference between frogs and toads.
Good question. Toads are generally the warty ones, and they prefer drier climate, and they do kind of a frog walk rather than a hop. That's where the term frog march comes in. It comes from the toads. Frogs, on the other hand, are slimier than toads, often without warts, and they're the hoppers. There are frogs in every corner of the earth except the Antarctic. They're everywhere, ubiquitous.
So why should we care if this American bullfrog is gobbling up its relatives?
Well, for one, that fungus Matt was talking about is killing amphibians at an alarming rate. Toads, frogs, other amphibians. There's a global survey that found the fungi played a role in the decline of over 500 species of frogs and toads. 90 species became extinct. These amphibians, they play a huge role in the environment. They chew up algae to keep blooms at bay. They devour mosquitoes that spread disease and provide food for birds and other animals. If you lose frogs, scientists are certain that the whole ecosystem will change. Here's Matt again. What would we lose if we just decided to let these guys go?
We'd lose biodiversity. That would be an extirpated species from British Columbia, which would be, an ecologically sad thing, or emotionally sad thing, and ecologically, hypothetically problematic. The ecosystem service that amphibians provide is important, and I think, everyone can agree that biodiversity is a really important thing for ecosystem function. Invasive species are second next to climate change to threats to global biodiversity, and bullfrogs as a known invasive species that are, on the top 100 list of the world's worst invasive species. It's a hugely problematic issue, and bullfrogs are globally distributed.
So Matt spots what they call eye shine near the shore, deep in some reeds, and his crew paddles over to have a look. It's too close to the shore to get a net in, so amphibian technician Jacob Iwashan decides he's going to try to grab the slippery frog by hand, which is something he's never done before. So Jacob tries a desperate launch out of the front of the canoe.
Yeah. Tell you.
Nice. I thought you just got a bunch of weeds there for a minute. So is he you've got him in the bottom of the boat now?
Got him right here. If we let him go in the bottom of the boat, he'll just jump right in.
Right.
Yeah, I'm kind of just holding him above the hips here to make sure he doesn't get away. And I'm thinking this one's a male. It's got a large kind of eardrum there, the tympanum, and then
that's what that is.
There's a little yellow on the bottom, which means he's getting ready for mating. They color up when they start getting ready to mate.
You've got a good grasp on him. What's the next step in this process?
We just put him in the clove oil, and that kind of just puts him to sleep in there. And then when we get back to the office, we'll take a weight and a length and make sure the gender's correct. And then that's it.
That's it for this guy.
Nice, you got one. So how many bullfrogs would they catch in a night?
They can capture and euthanize dozens in a single night. Here's some numbers for you. In 2016, the first year of the program, they captured just 8. And then, Mitch, 3 years later, it was over 1,000. The Americans are moving in big time. Bullfrogs can travel up to 10 kilometers a year. So it's slow, but it's a steady march or hop into BC. But they do think the program is working because last year they captured under 200 adult American bullfrogs. Remember, Mitch, they got 10 times that number the year before. And more importantly, the northern leopard frog appears to be coming back in the Creston area.
So killing one species to save another, isn't that going against what biologists stand for?
Well, it depends on how you look at it. Yes, they are killing bullfrogs, and Mitch, really, the one that I saw was really pretty cute. But they euthanized him. They dunked him in clove oil as an anesthetic, and the next would be the freezer for our frog. But Matt and his crews see it as a service to biodiversity. Here, I'll let him have the last word on this.
I don't like killing animals. It's definitely kind of an unfortunate role to play. And in terms of the sort of like moral imperative, I think there's some really interesting conversations to have with our role in the ecosystem as humans. For me, I kind of reconcile the need, the ecological need. But really, the whole idea is to buy the leopard frog some time. It's almost like the South Selkirk caribou herd, right? Where we lost the last individuals of that population, and that was a local extirpation. What we're looking at is a potential local extirpation of the northern leopard frog. And, again, very different situation, but something like managing wolf populations through culling that species to prevent predation on caribou.
Right.
We're kind of managing the bullfrog as a known predator and a known threat to this critically endangered species.
I still can't get my head around the fact we have 2 crews of full-time frog hunters. And it begs the question, can you ever really stop the march of nature? I think it was Patti Smith who said, the only thing you can count on is change. And she might be right. Is it even possible to freeze in the moment? Hold on to what we have. Preserve it forever. Graham Tracy has some thoughts on that. Graham caught wind of a teacher in Castlegar in the preservation business. I'll let him take it from here.
Thanks, Mitch. I arrive early to a suburban home just off the strip in Castlegar. A little too early.
Hey, dude, just jumping out of the shower. I'll meet you on back.
Okay, I should know better than showing up before coffee is brewed. I make my way to the backyard and introduce myself to Lino.
I'm Lino Grafoni. Come on in. So the place is kind of a disarray here. We just left it and called it a day.
This is Lino Grafoni's place, a brightly lit backyard studio where a dozen set of eyes peered down on us as we get to know one another.
All right, I was born in Italy, a little mountain village called Santo Stefano in the province of Avellino.
Lino's folks moved to Canada when he was a baby, and little Lino learned how to hunt shortly after he could walk. His first trophy is still a fond memory.
It was a ruffed grouse. My father and I were out hunting, and my godfather, and I had taken a beautiful ruffed grouse, a male.
Lino was so taken with the experience, with the wildlife, he began to paint it and sculpt it, and before long, stuff it. That's what all those eyes are peering down on us.
The very first mammal that I did was a roadkill porcupine. If you can look at them with the eye of restoring them to their original beauty, you view them differently, and we can make them beautiful again.
Turns out Lino had a talent for making dead things look alive, look beautiful even. A talent for taxidermy. Though I should say, he doesn't actually stuff them. It's a hardened polyurethane foam behind the skins and fur. The eyes peering down on us, I learn, are glass. Lino is so good at preserving animals, he wins awards and started a taxidermy school. The first privately registered post-secondary school in this country. Lino, you see, is a master of preservation.
That's precisely what we do. Yeah, restore them and preserve them. It's been taken to a much higher level where it's, we have world competitions. People go to compete, and it is, thankfully been now received and accepted as a very high level of art.
Lino knows his art is not for everyone, but it's an ancient trade. The first known taxidermists were Egyptians who mummified the pharaoh's dogs, cats, and monkeys so they could be buried with them. The oldest surviving work is a 500-year-old crocodile that hangs in a church in Italy where Lino's from. Who am I to knock tradition?
Hey, come on in, Kristen. Hey, good morning. How you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
You're ready to get at it?
You betcha we are.
Kristen Wells arrives at Lino's shop. She's a mother of 2 from Abbotsford. I peg as middle-aged.
How old am I? 40. Think about that for a second.
Kristen has an infectious giggle. Don't be fooled. She's a killer.
Well, it's a passion, and I started hunting probably like 5 or 6 years ago, and here we are.
Kristen's husband doesn't hunt. Her kids think it's a weird thing for mom to do. So she asked her grandfather.
I had asked my grandpa if I could tag along on one of his hunting trips, and he's very old school, so he's like, oh, there's no room for a girl on a hunting trip. So I was like, okay, well, I'll teach myself then.
It's amazing what you can learn on YouTube these days. Kristen learned to hunt and promptly went out and shot her first animal, a black bear. I don't know what to say about that.
I'm crazy. Yeah, probably. That's okay, too. Not everybody's cup of tea.
Kristen was enthralled, hooked. She sent her bear cape to a taxidermist to be mounted and found she loved that part of the process, too. here she is at Leno's school.
And I'm just absolutely fascinated by taxidermy and the specimens and just being able to use the whole animal instead of just harvesting it for meat. So getting to use the whole thing is definitely very cool. And I'm at a point in my life where it's time to focus on mom and do something for myself. So I decided to come to taxidermy school, and here we are.
All right. High level now. This piece of clay that we're going to place on top of the first piece is going to give us the brow and also form the eyelid.
Kristen is working with Leno on a piece she calls Benny the Buck, a deer cape she quietly took from her grandpa that she's going to surprise him with. The same grandpa that wouldn't take her hunting and doesn't know she's going to taxidermy school. It's complicated, like her love of taxidermy, which she insists is a form of art and preservation.
When you look into him, you can see his soul and just thankful for giving his life for you to be able to do this too. It's absolutely incredible. So I think this kind of honors the animal as well, because you're not just taking him and harvesting him, you're preserving him and giving him what he deserves. So I think this is good.
All right, then we'll take a little bit more clay, and now we'll give him just a little bit of a bottom eyelid. It's the ultimate recognition. Put the animal on the wall. You're not going to find anything more organic than a field harvested white-tailed deer or elk for that matter. For sure, yeah.
Okay. So far on this podcast, we've threatened to run over turkeys, gone on a frog kill, and watched as Benny the Buck was mounted. This podcast is supposed to be about saving species. Time we went where they are doing just that. Let's head down to the banks of the Columbia River. A couple dozen people gather for a salmon ceremony, led by Interior First Nations. The banging of rocks symbolizes what salmon in the river hear in the spring, the movement of those rocks in the riverbed. Of course, there are no salmon left in this part of the Columbia. Dams choked off their passage decades ago. First Nations to the west and the Okanagan have managed to bring the salmon back. They restored tributaries along the Columbia, reared fry in a hatchery, and helped mature salmon get around dams and back to the ocean. An incredible journey and feat. They're now trying to do the same here in the Kootenays. And this ceremony, led by Chad Ennius, is to call the salmon home once again.
In our culture, salmon is significant. The salmon, specifically in Titik, the chief of all those things in the water, that gives us balance in life. It's beyond just important for our people. I think it's important in terms of it being a keystone species in the Columbia. If you look at the health of the land, since things have been changing, there's a big difference. The number of other animals that you see that might have depended on salmon, just like we depend on salmon for food, some of those things have been obstructed. They're disappearing, and science calls it extirpated or extinct. With good management and consistent application of ethics, there should be no reason for recovery.
That's where we'll leave it, because I couldn't have said that more eloquently myself. With consistent application of ethics, we can bring this species back. That's nice. And that's our first podcast. The Headwaters is produced by Kootenay Mountain Culture Magazine and is brought to you by Columbia Basin Trust. Bob Keating writes, produces, and edits The Headwaters from his studio in Nelson. Graham Tracy and Lindsay Clegg were our reporters for episode 1. And to find out more about all of our episodes, head on over to headwaterspodcast.com. Columbia Basin Trust is helping to strengthen the places we all love. Learn more at ourtrust.org.